Hey guys, thought we'd switch it up a little bit. I won't be able to make the meeting, so I figured we would try to make a little video here. We're going to show you guys how to do yeast rinsing. Some people call it yeast washing, but really that involves chemicals, and we're not doing that today. So what we're going to do after you rack your beer into the keg or whatever that you're going to rack it into, you have your carboy. There's a little bit of beer in the bottom, and then a yeast cake and some other trub and things. So what you're going to do is just swish it, get it really good, try to break everything up, and then swish a little more. You have a sanitize or sterilize, whichever you prefer to do at home, mason jar here. So what I'm going to do is just take this, everything straight from the carboy, and pour it up. We're going to take all of this right now. Pretty much got just about all that we could fit here in the mason jar. Maybe top it off a little bit. Then what I'm going to do is put the lid on it here. I'm going to stick it in the refrigerator. So we're going to let the yeast settle down at the bottom with all the trub, and then we're going to let the beer kind of float up to the top, and then we're going to decant it, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so it's been in the fridge for about a half an hour now. We're just going to show you kind of what has happened to it. If you take a look, starting to see some stratification. There's some, foam up top from shaking it that's still starting to settle. You have a thin line of beer right there, and then you still have this mixture of yeast and dead cells and beer that everything still hasn't settled out yet. So we're going to keep that, put it back in the fridge, and allow that to completely separate until the beer is on top and the yeast is all the way down at the bottom in a nice little yeast cake. So I just wanted to go over a few reasons why you might rinse the yeast when you're brewing. I mean, I know some people think, yeah, I'll save $6, $7, $8 on a vial of yeast, or if you're going to use dry yeast, you save a couple dollars with that. So I mean, cost wise, if you're going to use it over several generations, you will save some money. But really, I mean, the biggest reason to reuse your yeast is that you have a nice healthy pitch of yeast that you in essence already made a starter for by brewing and fermenting that first batch of beer. You've already increased your cell count there and made a huge starter, much larger than you would have to for another batch of beer. So taking that, you can use that one rinsed bit of yeast in multiple batches of beer over the next couple weeks. Some people might ask, how long can you keep these yeast cells going? And most commercial breweries will brew 8 to 10 batches with that one initial set of yeast that they started with. So shelf life or refrigerator life. The refrigerator is the best place to keep your yeast after you rinse it. Most sources recommend up to 2 weeks is the best viability to reuse that rinsed yeast in a next batch of beer. The longer you wait, the more cells are going to die. You can make a starter with that again if you needed to, but most sources recommend the 2 weeks in the fridge. What you could do initially when you first rinse the yeast, you can measure the pH, write it down. If the pH rises more than 1 point, that indicates significant cell death, and you should dump that pitch of yeast and start with a new fresh batch. some people might say, well, you know, I just racked my beer out of the fermenter, all of that yeast is still sitting in the bottom, why don't I just rack some new beer right on top of it? Now, you can do that. Is it going to make, you know, decent, good beer? Probably. Is it going to make the best beer that you can make? No. And the reasons why is the same reason, you know, you're going to see as it starts to separate. In that carboy, with all of the healthy yeast, there's a lot of dead yeast, there's a lot of hop matter, and there's break material that's all still in there. It's not a nice clean pitch of yeast. So you're going to put more hop matter on top of that, you're going to put more break material on top of that. So your best bet is to rinse the yeast if you want the best pitch of yeast possible. There's one other thing I wanted to cover now. It completely it's left me. So it just came to me, the things that I wanted to cover. One of the things you might be questioning is what styles of beer or what gravities of beer, you know, should I be using this rinse yeast for, and so on and so forth. The general rule is to start with your first generation a lower gravity beer, 1050, 1060, and then continue, you know, to go up. Once you get above 1075 or so, you really don't want to keep using that yeast. You're going to stress it out so much, and it's going to start to mutate that you might just want to, you know, stop using it at that point. And also a general rule is to start with your least hoppy beers first and work your way up with that, because those yeast are going to, even though they're microscopic, they're going to suck in some of that hop flavor, the bittering compounds, and anything else that you might have put in each batch of beer. So you need to keep that in mind when you're going to reuse this yeast. Which is also another good reason why you would want to rinse the yeast rather than just put your you know, fresh wort on top of that yeast cake, is that you're going to be carrying over all of those flavors from that first style of beer into each batch of beer afterwards. So just keep those in mind when you are thinking about whether or not you want to start rinsing your yeast or not. Alright guys, so it's been about 12 hours. It took a little longer than we thought for it to settle out. But this is basically what we have here now, the separation. This is all basically yeast and some other particles. You got your beer on top. So what we're going to do is just decant the beer out of here. So we're going to try to get as much beer out of this as we can. Get a little yeast out of it. And this is good to drink. I mean, it's going to be a little flat, but that's okay. So what I have here is boiled and cooled water that I'm going to use to help separate this further. So what I'm going to do is fill this all the way up to the top. Leave a little bit of room to shake. I'm going to put this cap back on and then just shake it. You want to break up any, you know, flocks of yeast that are in there. You really want to shake it up really well. Get everything off of the bottom. We'll just loosen that cap a little bit, and then we're going to let that settle. You know, hopefully we'll see some separation. Might have to put it back in the fridge. So take a sip of this. This is actually a pale ale. that Ryan and I brewed with 100% apple and mesquite smoked malt. So the nose, I was just similar to bacon. You could definitely get the smokiness right off the bat. Alright, so we're going to finish up the video here on rinsing your yeast. So when we left you, we have filled this up about halfway with boiled and cooled water. So you can see here, this faint color, it almost looks like Miller Lite there on top. So basically we poured off all of the beer last time and put the water back in here, so you could just see how much beer was actually still mixed in with all of that yeast. So it's really important, again, if you're going to reuse your yeast, that you should do this rinsing process so that you don't get those flavors carrying over from batch to batch. Now, this is a mason jar that's been cleaned, sanitized, don't have a pressure cooker or an autoclave, so it's not sterilized. Now what I'm going to do is just flame the outside of this mason jar here, just to kill anything that might be on the top or on the side of that mason jar. Okay. So what I'm going to do is pour off all the liquid from the top here. It's kind of difficult to see, but you could, hopefully you can see there's really no yeast at the top floating that's separated from the main yeast cake. But you can see down at the bottom that layer of all the hop bits and break material and dead yeast that's taking up about 1/6, I would say, of the jar there. So we don't want that. So we're going to stop the pour right before we get there. Okay, so stopped it right before we started to get the hop bits in there, and if you could see, maybe there's a line coming down the center, and then you can see inside there all of the chunks that we don't want in this washed yeast. So I'm going to take that lid, put it back on, and your yeast is ready to use again. I would say that's about enough to probably pitch in 2 batches of beer, all from that one. So you can see how we basically just made a starter with that 5 gallons of wort. So I'm going to put this in the fridge and brew with it within the next 2 weeks. Hope you guys enjoyed the video on rinsing yeast. I hope you give it a shot at home the next time you're brewing, instead of just putting your new wort on top of that old yeast cake. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at brewjerseyhbc@gmail.com. See you next time.